In just 3 minutes of combat, HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, detonated in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, leaving only 3 survivors out of 1,418 sailors. The culprit? A single German battleship on her maiden mission. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, his face flushed with rage, issued a simple 6-word order: sink the Bismarck at all costs. Within hours, the Royal Navy mobilized the largest manhunt in naval history. 6 battleships, 2 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, and 21 destroyers, all chasing a single target. Displacing over 50,000 tons, her 8 15-inch guns outranged any British pursuer. Her advanced radar arrays spotted aircraft before they could spot her, and her compartment design made her seemingly unsinkable. Bismarck raced toward the safety of occupied France, with the world's largest navy snapping at her heels. But a single small wound betrayed the pride of the Kriegsmarine, a long slick of oil trailing behind her. And British aircraft were closing in. The crown jewel of the Third Reich. February 14th, 1939. A cold wind swept across the Elbe River as workers, officers and dignitaries gathered along the slipways at Blom and Voss in Hamburg. At the center of the pageantry lay the unfinished hull of Germany's newest battleship, the Bismarck, poised to launch for the first time after nearly 3 years of construction. Dorothee von Löwenfeld, granddaughter of Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor for whom the ship was named, stepped forward to smash a bottle of champagne against the bow and officially christen the vessel. Adolf Hitler himself addressed the crowd, marking the debut of this new symbol of German power. Though Bismarck was presented to the world as a design that adhered to treaties, when fully loaded, she displaced over 50,000 tons, far exceeding the 35,000-ton limit. Her dimensions matched her ambition. 823 feet long, a beam of 121 feet, and a range of over 10,000 nautical miles. When finally commissioned in August 1940, Captain Ernst Lindemann, a career officer with a reputation for discipline and loyalty, assumed command of Bismarck and her crew of over 2,200 men. Though Hitler and the Kriegsmarine needed her operational quickly, sea trials revealed a troubling flaw. Bismarck was nearly impossible to steer using her engines alone. Operation Rheinübung, a bold gamble. By the time Bismarck was finally ready for war in mid-1941, Germany's broader Atlantic strategy was faltering. The battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were both damaged and trapped in Brest, while Tirpitz, Bismarck's nearly identical sister ship, was still being fitted out in Wilhelmshaven. Crucially, the Kriegsmarine could not match the Royal Navy in an open fleet battle, forcing Grand Admiral Erich Raeder to push for limited commerce raiding. Bismarck's first mission, Operation Rheinübung, was designed around that strategy. The German jewel would break out into the Atlantic, avoid direct engagement with capital ships, link up with pre-positioned supply vessels, and begin decimating Allied convoys with impunity. With the rest of the fleet out of action, the operation was no longer a show of force, but a bold gamble. Finally, on May 18, 1941, Bismarck slipped out of Gortenhafen under a grey Baltic sky, accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen and a trio of destroyers. Overseeing it all was Admiral Günther Lütjens. The breakout plan hinged on slipping past British strength undetected. The English Channel was impossible. It was too narrow, too exposed, and under constant surveillance. This left only the northern route, hugging the coast of neutral Norway, where Bismarck could use bad weather and the lingering twilight of spring to mask her movements. From there, the objective was to traverse the Denmark Strait, one of the last gaps in Allied air and naval coverage, and break into the open Atlantic. Detected, and the chase begins. On the 20th, the squadron passed through the Kattegat, but they did not go unnoticed. Around noon, the Swedish cruiser Gotland spotted the German force and flashed a signal up the chain of command. By evening, that report had reached London. Admiral Lütjens quickly relayed this development to German Naval Command, yet he maintained his protocol and refused to enforce total radio silence, even during a mission of such sensitivity. The next day, RAF pilot Michael Suckling, alone in his Spitfire at 26,000 feet, flew directly over the German squadron and captured high-altitude reconnaissance photos of Bismarck and Prince Eugen. With visual confirmation in hand, Admiral John Tovey placed the home fleet on high alert. Hood, Prince of Wales, and 6 destroyers were ordered to intercept from Iceland. As the sun set that evening and the German squadron departed Bergen, Prince Eugen topped off her fuel tanks. Whether due to time constraints, misinformation, or hubris, Admiral Lütjens chose to proceed without refueling his flagship. A decision he would soon regret. The Battle of the Denmark Strait and the fall of HMS Hood. At 05:45 on May 24, 1941, German lookouts aboard Bismarck spotted smoke on the horizon. It was the battlecruiser HMS Hood and the battleship HMS Prince of Wales. Lowering his binoculars, Admiral Lütjens ordered immediate battle stations. 7 minutes later, from a range of nearly 28,000 yards, Hood opened fire. Prince of Wales followed 1 minute later. The British ships, commanded by Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, initially targeted different vessels, with Hood mistakenly focusing on Prince Eugen instead of Bismarck. As Bismarck began to return fire, the British ships charged head-on, a tactic that masked their rear turrets and limited them to only their forward guns. The Germans, however, were positioned broadside, able to unleash full salvos from all main turrets. Vice Admiral Holland ordered a turn to port, desperate to bring Hood's aft guns into the action. It was a fatal move. As the great ship turned, she exposed her flank. Now focusing all fire on Hood, Prince Eugen drew first blood, an 8-inch shell igniting a fire amidships. Finally, after several attempts, with the range now locked, Bismarck's main battery of 8 15-inch guns fired a rapid salvo at Hood, while her secondary 5.9-inch guns simultaneously engaged Prince of Wales. Sensing the British confusion, Lütjens ordered his force to concentrate fire. With the range now locked, Bismarck's main battery fired a full salvo at Hood. At exactly 0600 hours, just as Hood began her second turn, an armor-piercing shell from Bismarck plunged through her deck, penetrating deep into the aft magazine. Instantly, the ship broke apart between the mainmast and the funnel. Within 8 minutes of the first shot, Hood was gone, taking 1,416 sailors down with her. For many families, it was a wound that never healed. One observer recounted that his uncle had perished on the Hood. Another shared the story of his grandfather, who had served on the ship for years, but was fortuitously transferred just before the ill-fated voyage. He knew so many men who went down with the ship, that the grief was so profound, he never spoke of it. With Hood sunk, Bismarck shifted her full attention to Prince of Wales. The British ship scored a few hits, one flooding a generator room, another passing through the bow, but she was hopelessly outgunned. When a shell from Bismarck smashed into the bridge, she had no choice but to turn away. Although Captain Lindemann urged a pursuit, Lütjens refused. In just 21 minutes, Bismarck had fired nearly 100 shells. But after taking 3 hits, damage to her hull was worsening, and as she turned south at a reduced speed, a long slick of oil trailed behind her. Sink the Bismarck, a transatlantic manhunt. Following their major victory, Bismarck escaped into the open ocean and soon set a course for German-occupied Brest in France. In London, Churchill received the report and issued a simple command: sink the Bismarck. Within hours, every available ship was diverted for the chase. The home fleet came about at maximum speed, still 400 miles away, but steaming full ahead to intercept. The battleship Rodney abandoned her convoy escort and altered course. 6 battleships and battlecruisers, 2 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, and 21 destroyers were all following Bismarck's oil trail. As night fell on May 24th, hours later, through driving rain and a darkening sky, Swordfish torpedo bombers from the carrier Victorious found their target. And then, the defining moment of the hunt arrived, not from 16-inch guns, but from something that looked like a relic of the past. The Fairey Swordfish biplanes, affectionately known by their pilots as string bags, were slow, obsolete machines made of canvas and wire. But these flying museums were about to change naval history. Under the leadership of Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond, the antiquated biplanes dived through a wall of intense anti-aircraft fire. One torpedo found its mark, detonating against Bismarck's armor belt. The blow shook the massive ship, but caused only minimal damage. In the night, Bismarck slipped away to the south, altering course toward France, while the Royal Navy steamed northeast, still believing she was heading for Norway. Deciding to break radio silence, Admiral Lütjens transmitted a detailed report of their position to Berlin, and British listening stations intercepted it immediately. As she held steady at 21 knots, her damaged bow was taking on water asymmetrically, forcing her to burn fuel unevenly just to maintain trim. Miles away, British forces faced a crisis of their own. Prince of Wales, Repulse, Victorious, and 4 cruisers broke off the hunt, their fuel bunkers nearly empty. From Gibraltar, a second strike group surged north. Force H, commanded by Admiral James Somerville and built around the carrier Ark Royal and the battlecruiser Renown, was racing to intercept Bismarck before she could reach the safety of French ports and the protection of the Luftwaffe. At 10:30 hours on May 26th, through breaking clouds and hazy air, a Catalina flying boat spotted Bismarck and her trailing oil. Within minutes, Swordfish from Ark Royal confirmed the sighting. Now Bismarck, still 690 miles from the French coast, was about to face the full weight of British naval power converging from all directions. Cornered, and the final strike. Through pouring rain and rough seas on the afternoon of May 26th, HMS Ark Royal launched 15 Swordfish biplanes. However, the pilots were not warned that a Royal Navy asset, HMS Sheffield, had been sent ahead to shadow Bismarck. They mistook the British cruiser for their target and sent magnetic torpedoes racing toward her, all of which either exploded on contact with the sea or missed entirely. Bismarck continued through the rising swell, her crew unaware that the next wave of Swordfish was already airborne, this time carrying contact detonators. Just after 2000 hours, the Swordfish found Sheffield again and took their vector, rain hammering against their wings as radar flickered and visibility dropped to near zero. At 2047 hours, they finally spotted Bismarck, and her anti-aircraft guns opened fire immediately. One torpedo struck amidships with little effect, but then another found its mark near the stern, jamming the rudder. The world's most modern war machine had been crippled by a weapon from a bygone era. It was an iconic moment, signaling the end of the battleship age and the rise of air power at sea. Suddenly, the ship that had terrorized the North Atlantic could no longer steer her own course. Bismarck limped through the waves as British forces closed in from all sides. Admiral Tovey, monitoring reports, swung his forces south, aiming to intercept at dawn when the rising sun would silhouette Bismarck as a perfect target. Aboard Bismarck, damage control teams worked in gale force winds, trying to free the jammed rudder. Waves crashed over the decks as the ship attempted to steer crudely by adjusting propeller speeds. But it was not enough. The storm and the damage were forcing Bismarck into a slow arc, sweeping directly toward the oncoming British fleet. At 23:40 hours, Admiral Lütjens transmitted his final message to German headquarters. "Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." The final 106 minutes. As dawn broke over the Atlantic, with grey skies, rough seas, and a strong northwesterly wind, Admiral Tovey delayed the attack, waiting for full daylight to perfectly silhouette his target. In the mist, just before 0845, the heavy cruiser HMS Norfolk was the first to stumble upon the battered Bismarck, limping in a circle. Norfolk immediately signaled the rest of the fleet, "Enemy in sight." Moments later, lookouts aboard the fleet flagship HMS King George V spotted her silhouette just 25,000 yards away. The trap was sprung. The battleship HMS Rodney, an older vessel but armed with massive 16-inch guns, opened fire first at 0847. The flagship followed seconds later. Bismarck, unable to steer and tossed by the violent seas, valiantly returned fire, but her salvos went wide, straddling Rodney, but failing to score a hit. The final brutal reckoning had begun. Just after 0900 hours, with the range closing, Rodney's shells began to find their mark. One 16-inch shell smashed directly into Bismarck's forward superstructure, obliterating the main fire control director and wiping out nearly everyone inside, including most of her senior officers. Almost simultaneously, another hit knocked out the forward main gun turrets. In an instant, Bismarck was half blind and half disarmed. Command fell to the aft fire control post, but it too was silenced within minutes. With the command structure collapsing, First Officer Hans Oehls, now the senior surviving officer, realized the ship was lost. He rushed from compartment to compartment, shouting the final orders: "Open the watertight doors, prepare demolition charges, abandon ship." The crew began the process of scuttling their own vessel. But it was too late for Oehls. A shell from King George V tore through the armor belt and exploded in the aft canteen, killing him, and over 100 other men gathered there. By 1000 hours, Bismarck was a burning, helpless wreck, her guns silenced, listing heavily to port. The British battleships closed to point-blank range, pouring thousands of shells into the dying giant. In an act almost unheard of in modern naval combat, HMS Rodney fired its torpedoes at the German ship, one of the very few instances in history of a battleship torpedoing another. By 10:20 hours, running critically low on fuel, Admiral Tovey ordered his battleships to withdraw. The heavy cruiser HMS Dorsetshire was sent in to deliver the coup de grace. When a final torpedo struck Bismarck's flooded port side at 10:35 hours, she began to capsize. 5 minutes later, at 10:40 hours, the pride of the German Navy rolled over and disappeared beneath the waves. In a battle lasting 106 minutes, the Royal Navy had fired over 2,800 shells, scoring hundreds of hits. The battle was over, but the human tragedy was just beginning. HMS Dorsetshire and HMS Maori lingered, pulling 110 German survivors from the freezing Atlantic. Hundreds more were still in the water. But then, a U-boat alarm sounded. Fearing an attack, the British ships were forced to abandon the rescue, leaving hundreds of men to their fate. But even in that moment of brutal necessity, humanity shone through. Captain Benjamin Martin of HMS Dorsetshire had risked his ship to save as many as he could. On board his vessel, a midshipman named Joe Brooks, unable to bear the sight of men dying in the oil-slicked water, jumped into the sea himself to help pull them aboard. An act he later explained with a single word: humanity. Of Bismarck's crew of over 2,200 men, only 114 would survive the sinking and the cold Atlantic waters. Aftermath and legacy. As Bismarck sank beneath the Atlantic, the German Air Force remained grounded by severe weather, utterly unable to protect her. The loss shook Germany, as the nation's most powerful battleship had survived less than 9 days at sea. Even Prime Minister Churchill later reflected on the significance of the victory, stating, "The sinking of the Bismarck has had a beneficial effect upon the whole course of the war at sea." And the lesson went deeper than that. The Bismarck event proved a harsh truth. The era where massive battleships ruled the oceans was over. A ship worth millions of marks could be neutralized by an obsolete biplane. This was precisely why her sister ship, Tirpitz, spent most of the remainder of the war hiding in Norwegian fjords. The death of Bismarck was also the death of a doctrine of warfare. Surface operations were frozen, and major warships were kept in port, except for limited missions in northern waters. The days of the Kriegsmarine were numbered. The story of the hunt for Bismarck became a modern epic, retold in books, films, and even folk songs. For many, the melody of Johnny Horton's song, "Sink the Bismarck," became a part of childhood memory. A reminder of a great hunt at sea and the courage of those who took part.